parts, Your Honor. I do have a law firm witness that I would like to call on this particular matter, one of the partners. We have the Satterfield matter. There is a confession of judgment, but we can present testimony on that as well. And we have a bank witness to establish the financial condition of Alec at the time these murders happened. Which was, he was burning through cash like crazy. He was out of options. The $792,000 was gone in no time at all. And I think the evidence is very compelling that for an extended period of time he had been living in a velocity of money that is really quite stunning. And he constantly had to achieve more money to avoid the reckoning that was happening. I'm sorry, Mr. And so it will show on that particular day, that on June 7th, 2021, when he's being asked about these Ferris fees, the financial condition is not good. There's not that money there. He's extremely leveraged in the debt that he has, and it will be part of a history where he is forced to do all these things that we've been showing through Ms. Seconder to stay afloat and to stay one step ahead. And for the jury to understand the reality of what he was facing, they have to understand the extent of what is being potentially exposed. They have to understand why he would be doing these things and why he was out of time. This is not the kind of case where, and I don't know if you want a legal argument at this point, but
well, I asked a question.
Yes, sir.
I guess this is still your answer. I don't know.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Judge. So anyway, this is the kind of case where, for example, he mentions the Boat case out of the gate. The Boat case, the hearing was going to be that week. We will establish evidence that the hearing was to get access or get identification of his accounts. Once that happens, that he would be unable, there would be not long before what had been going on would be exposed. And what we're talking about, and this is really how it's different from some of the other res juste and other cases that you're looking at, is it's really about the fear of what is about to be exposed. And what we're talking about, again, is a decade of malfeasance and misappropriation that ultimately would result in the charges that it's resulted in, as well as loss of his livelihood and loss of his law degree. And that's the real fear that was there. And when we look at June 7th in particular, at that point in time, he's out of options. We've heard from Ms. Seconder that in the past, if he'd been able to pay that money or repay that money, then he could always kick that can down the road. But on this particular day, the state believes we have evidence, and we believe it's a reasonable inference from those evidence that he was out of options. But for the jury to really understand what's going on, they have to understand the full picture of what this man has been doing and what he's been trying to hide. And frankly, what he was able to successfully hide in the wake of these murders. The bank witnesses will also establish, relevant specifically to this particular witness and the events that you've heard about, is that one of the first things that Mr. Murdaugh did, business-related, was to secure $600,000. He got a loan from PSB, Palmetto State Banks, that wasn't even on the books. They just wired the money. Russell Lafitte wired the money, $350. He borrowed $250,000 from another person, and that's the $600 that he gave to Chris, that he used to talk Chris into telling PMPED that all $792 were back in the account. And so, again, that's one of the first things he did to stave off the inquiry that very morning, 6/7/21, was to get that money in there, and it did. It staved off the inquiry. The fact that Ms. Seconder, there had been a number of things that had been occurring over a while, ultimately turned her attention back to Alec. It doesn't change the fact that it did effectively delay that time period and delay the ultimate detection of that. And he was able to put that money in, much as he was able to do when he stole the $125,000 from his brother, or he used the firm credit card, or what we see throughout this, throughout the extent of his financial matters. So the bank witness ultimately will establish two things. Number one, his financial condition at the time, and number two, his efforts in the wake of the murders to secure that additional money so that he could get enough back to Chris Wilson to talk him into telling the law firm that there was nothing to see here, that everything was okay. And frankly, it worked until two things happened. Number one, Ms. Sechinger started to look back at the Hirschberg matter, and then more importantly, and we have another law firm witness. Don't know the check's up on the screen. Stand by for me, Your Honor. That found this check right here, this very one, in his office, right around that same time in early September. And at that point in time, they knew that he had been lying to them about these particular fees. And that's what caused everything to unravel. And then, just like we see, Your Honor, with what happened on June 7th, 2021, within a short period of time, the side of the road happens. And Alec immediately claims that he was the victim of a horrible attack, and everyone immediately assumes that the bad guys are back. There's a symmetry, Your Honor, between what happens on the side of the road and what happens on June 7th, because when the hounds are at the door, when Hannibal's at the gates for Alex Murdaugh, violence happens. And the same thing happened on the side of the road that happened on June 7th. And for this jury to understand the real picture of this man that I will remind Your Honor, I know you're well aware of, that they have already repeatedly put into issue his character and what a loving father he was and all the rest of it, they need to understand really what this man was hiding. And he was hiding something we have never seen before. And the pressures of that are important for the jury to understand why this man might do that.
Mr. Griffin, any comments you'd like to make?
Yes, Your Honor. I would like to respond. What you've heard thus far today does not establish that Hannibal's at the gate in any form or fashion. What you heard from Ms. Sechinger, is that what's the language she used? Hang on, I've got it right here. Quote, there's a history of trust and brotherhood in the firm, and that some similar events have happened in the past where Alec had been overdrawn with the firm through loan checks or expense checks, and that eventually the money gets paid back and everyone goes about their merry way. I mean that is basically what she testified to, Your Honor, and this sort of concept that Alec committed murders to cause a delay in the firm investigating this diversion of fees was debunked by her own testimony, where she said, number one, Mr. Randolph Murdaugh was going back in the hospital to die, and that I stopped in my tracks and I became a friend and stopped looking, and that Mr. Murdaugh did die. I mean, that's what stopped her conversation, and that's what stopped her inquiry on June the 7th, by her own testimony. And then you go forward, and then she says she passed it off to Lee Cope. And then Lee Cope kept following up, and he communicated with Mr. Wilson. And Mr. Wilson sent an email. Alec had gotten money back into the account. And frankly, Your Honor, if this plays out, as we attach to our response, the draft transcript from the trial testimony in Russell Lafitte's case, that Mr. Murdaugh had in progress at Palmetto State Bank a loan application to get refinancing, and that Maggie's murder stopped and delayed that. And it had the complete opposite effect. He wasn't at the end of his rope. The murder of Maggie, if we have to play out this, the murder of Maggie actually caused a delay in the refinancing of the Edisto house, and it precluded getting additional loans from Moselle. And so those are the facts. And how murdering Maggie Murdaugh and murdering Paul Murdaugh eased his financial stress, it didn't. There's no financial gain, as we said. There's no life insurance. There's nothing to be gained by it. And so there's no logical connection from his, disastrous financial house and potentially having to be answer to financial misconduct within the firm, losing his law license, being criminally prosecuted. And it's all just a theory. There's no facts. It's all just a theory. But the theory is the best way out is for him to murder his wife and son and put himself bullseye in that circle that you heard about in the testimony of this case, and that he is the prime suspect number one because he's the father, he's the husband, he finds the bodies, they show up and he's holding a shotgun, and he does that to get out from under scrutiny of a $700,000 diversion of fees with a history of trust and brotherhood in that law firm. Your Honor, there is no logical connection whatsoever, and it does not lead to evidence of motive. And we can have more testimony, but frankly, Your Honor, it doesn't meet. And then if we go into 403 and unfair prejudice, you heard a lot of unfair prejudice here, but the undue delay, confusion of the issues to the jury, they've got a whole lot more evidence about financial misconduct than they have about a murder and evidence of guilt in the murder case. And that's what this is all about.
With regard to the list of other witnesses that Mr. Waters indicates that the state has, for purposes of the court being able to do an analysis as to whether there's clear and convincing evidence, you've indicated with regard to some of the witnesses, some of the files, you do not or did not contest them. But if you have a few employees from the law firm, including Lee Cope, Mr. Murdaugh's secretary or administrative assistant, excluding someone from the bank. Who's the other person you mentioned?
Well, we have also the Satterfield, which, of course, we have a confession of judgment. For purposes of this hearing, that might be sufficient for the court's analysis, although the circumstances, I think, are very relevant. And then with the boat case, the one thing I want to add, and that would be Mark Tinsley in the boat case, is to understand the context of the boat case and understand how this all relates to everything, is not only was the discovery there being sought by Mr. Tinsley, but there will be testimony. And again, this is all in transcripts, which they have, and I don't know, I've talked with the defense about, obviously they don't have to concede and they'll be able to cross and all the rest of it, but it is in transcripts. They've had a chance to review it, whether or not that's sufficient, at least for an in-camera determination. But one of the things that Mark Tinsley will say was the very aggressive posture which they were taking in the boat case, which meant that Alex Murdaugh was not a defendant of convenience, that the goal of the litigation, at least as it related to him, was a personal recovery. And that is why he was proceeding so aggressively in that particular case. Mark Tinsley will also say that, and we'll talk about how that litigation was going, but we'll also say that after the crimes of June 7th, 2021, that landscape completely changed. This was an extremely significant liability, and the testimony will be that that aggressive posture, seeking a personal recovery from Alex Murdaugh, actually of $10 million, that they weren't coming off that, and that was the manner in which that litigation was going. Once the murders happened, that was done, and Mr. Tinsley will testify to that, at least the posture that they were taking.
Well, the court has heard sufficient amount of received sufficient amount of evidence to make a determination regarding clear and convincing evidence involving the law firm, and do not need to hear from Mr. Cope or the other witness, what's her name? Ms. Griswold, in order to make that determination of there being clear and convincing evidence. With regard to Satterfield, you do have a confession of judgment, which the court has not seen or reviewed. With regard to the boat case, there's been no